Warning: this episode features adult language and situations not necessarily suitable to younger audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Patreon-sponsored review time again, and... say... it's Miller time! Yeah, new Miller Time music. Pizzicato playtime keeps getting claimed, and it's not really fair use. I no longer make money off of a bunch of Miller Time episodes, which sucks because those are some of my most popular. So one of the reasons why Miller Time exists at all is because once upon a time, Frank Miller was considered a great writer. He's not anymore, and even after his non-apology for Holy Terror, DC decided to have him do Superman Year One, and it's... not great. Expect some episodes on that eventually. A lot of Miller's early work in the mainstream industry was as a fill-in artist, eventually getting the job of the artist on Daredevil as the book was having fledgling sales. Miller, while enjoying drawing the book, hated the scripts of the writer at the time, Roger McKenzie. Denny O'Neil, editor of the book at the time, recognized the potential Miller had with it and allowed him to take over writing duties. And thus he introduced Elektra and started doing revisions to a lot of Daredevil's character and backstory. Sales improved drastically, and eventually he gave up on doing the artistic duties so he could focus on the writing. He eventually left the book in 1983, and Denny O'Neil took over writing from there for several years. In 1986, O'Neil was ready to leave the series, and the new editor, Ralph Macchio, asked Miller if he wanted to come back. He agreed only on the condition that the artist, David Mazzucchelli, would work from full scripts. Bear in mind that this was still in the age of the Marvel method, where artists worked from an outline of a book without having a full script. Because of course, Frank would need to write in full how the audience should be drooling over a woman in her underwear. That's the quality you get from a full Frank Miller script. I kid. The interesting thing about reading this book is how not Miller it feels. Partially that's because this is before Sin City, but also because this isn't Batman. It's very rare for us on this show to not be looking at a Frank Miller Batman story, having only really done so with RoboCop vs. the Terminator or Tales to Offend, which was just god-awful and felt entirely like a modern Miller story. And of course, Holy Terror was pretty much a Frank Miller Batman story just with the ears filed off. The storyline and his introduction of Elektra are pretty much the defining stories of Daredevil, but also some of the most lauded stuff Frank Miller has ever produced. Does it still hold up today after we've seen so much of his more recent stuff? Well, let's dig into Daredevil number 227 to 233, aka the storyline Born Again, and see for ourselves. So right off the bat, some of you will be wondering about the numbering of this, since issues 232 and 233 are not technically part of Born Again, and the trade collection of the story also included number 226, which we're not looking at, mostly because it's really not actually connected. I'm following this from the instructions of the patron, and issues 232 and 233, while not technically a part of the storyline, are included in the trade and serve as an epilogue to it, so it's still kind of relevant to do so. And as we're reading from a trade and no looking at the covers, not that we want to anyway, since we've got several issues to review. We open in a seedy office with moody lighting drifting in through the window. It's a hot day, like all the rest. All 2 years of them. You could close the blinds, passive heating is a thing, you know. We're introduced to Karen Page, Daredevil's former love interest and secretary. She had left the book, and Daredevil himself, to pursue a career in acting. As we can see from the dialogue, it didn't exactly work out.
Yeah, I'm sure I've seen one of your flicks. You're big at the stag parties. My friends are all huge fans of your romantic comedies.
Yeah, apparently she fell into pornography and drug use, so needs a fix. And the porn industry isn't exactly paying huge dividends. This is just one of the many examples that would contribute to Frank's reputation of being unable to write women unless they're in some way related to sexuality. Sex work, being objectified or lusted after by other characters, or the reader. And of course, you can look up plenty of examples of him not doing that, but it's a common quirk of his writing, and I'm not the first person to notice it. It's a song that's perpetually on loop in his head. Whores, 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 prostitutes. That being said, ain't nothing sexy about what's being shown here. Karen is desperate for a fix, and has only one last thing she can sell that'll be worth any money. Daredevil's secret identity. 6 weeks later, all just as hot. J. Jonah Jameson continues to blame climate change on Spider-Man. We see that Daredevil's identity gets passed along to Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin. And you know this is serious business because the sky is turning red. In DC, that would mean a crisis event. The Kingpin had become a recurring villain in Daredevil about 50 issues ago, and stuff like this is what cemented him as one of Daredevil's primary antagonists after he had originally started as one of Spider-Man's. Sure, he still interacts with both, but you could make the case for a lot of other villains in Spidey's gallery as his worst enemy or the like. Anyway, Kingpin orders his lieutenant, Wesley, to get ready to murder anyone who has ever touched the envelope with the secret identity on it if it turns out to be accurate. It might seem an odd thing to do to otherwise loyal people who just handed that info over, but bear in mind that information like that is power. He may want to destroy Daredevil, but if he fails, being the only one with that information gives him an edge over any other potential rival. And if the information is wrong, then you just wasted his time and money based on a note given by a junkie. And that's not smart thinking for a criminal empire, and he may need to do some reorganization. We cut to 6 months later as Matt Murdock wakes up to the worst day of his life. It starts off not great already, feeling a bit sore from the previous night's crime fighting.
Why did I get up this morning?
Big mood, Matt. So, about that worst day of his life thing. First, he gets a cassette tape from his girlfriend.
I love her, but she makes the worst mixtapes.
Followed quickly by the bank informing him that they haven't received his last 2 mortgage payments, which he knows he paid, as well as a notice from the IRS that he's getting audited and that all of his money is frozen until the audit is complete. He apparently decided to listen to the tape while at the same time calling his accountant. I don't know, maybe he can multitask like that. But his girlfriend is breaking up with him, while said accountant is apparently also breaking up with him. We don't hear what he says, but we get the gist of it. And the day's only just begun. He receives a subpoena to appear in front of a grand jury. An hour later, he learns the details of why that is. Nicholas Manoli, a veteran cop with an impeccable record, claims that he saw Murdock pay a witness to perjure himself. To round out how things have been going, his parents rise from the dead to say that they never loved him. He gets a severe case of food poisoning just as the water company shuts off his pipes due to lack of payment, and he steps on a Lego brick despite not owning any Legos. Matt's not the only one having a crappy day, as Foggy Nelson stops by Matt's now ex-girlfriend, Gloriana O'Brien, who found her apartment ransacked and her photography destroyed. Daily Bugle reporter Ben Urich calls Matt to try to get info from him on the charges, mostly out of concern for his friend, but Matt's already starting to crack with all this happening. Speaking of, Matt decides to clear his head that night by going out as Daredevil. We get some of that neo-noir narration that Frank also became famous for, especially with Sin City, but here it actually feels a lot more naturally poetic and reasonable. Daredevil's expositing about the sensations he feels, wind in his face, what he experiences as he parkours across rooftops and power lines. Sure, like every other metaphysical concept, Frank Miller describes it like a woman because sex, 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 but again, it sounds less like he does nowadays where he wants Batman to stick his dick in a brick wall. Foggy and Gloriana spend the night together at his apartment, though Foggy clearly doesn't want to pursue a relationship with her despite the romantic closeness of the situation, no doubt out of respect for Matt. Daredevil, meanwhile, heads to the home of Nick Manolis to try to get an explanation.
The music in there is the kind you hear in department stores. There's something obscene about playing it loud. I've heard "thank you next" like 50 times already. Give it a rest. I can't relate to it at all. How he can follow that stupid sitcom he's watching is beyond me. Can you believe Big Bang Theory lasted 12 seasons? Baffling.
When he goes to the fridge for a beer, Daredevil enters and wants to know why he lied, but the guy just tries to attack him. Unsuccessfully.
I could force the truth from him, tough as he is. I'd have to use torture. He'd deserve it.
And of course he leaves, because Daredevil is still a hero, and that would be horribly wrong. Frank changed his mind about that 25 years later in Holy Terror. I guess Daredevil just wasn't the gentle soul that the Fixer was. After Daredevil leaves, Nick makes a phone call to report that Daredevil did indeed show up, and we learn why he lied. That his son is ill and needs a special treatment. No doubt something the Kingpin is bankrolling for this. Daredevil's actually outside on the roof, in the snowstorm, and that outfit cannot be that warm, listening to this.
A symphonic version of the theme to Kojak is getting into full swing, so I missed the voice on the other end of the line. It's hard to stomach the Muzak or Nick's whining.
Thanks, Dick Devil. Nice to know you have no sympathy for a dude desperately trying to save his son. Also, the Kojak theme is good. What's your problem? After going to sleep in a cold apartment without dinner, the next morning Matt calls Foggy and informs him of what's been going on. We soon see how things progress over the next few weeks. The Kingpin using his vast network of agents to monitor both Murdoch and Daredevil as, by day, he tirelessly works on a legal defense against the frame-up, and by night beating people to a pulp to try to find out who's responsible for all this. Foggy puts up an impassioned defense in court. It keeps Matt out of prison, but it does get his law license revoked. The Kingpin even makes a note to try to hire both of them in the future. Foggy for how effective a defense attorney he is, and Matt just because it's the ultimate humiliation and power move over him. An interesting thing to note is that the Kingpin believes Matt to only be faking his blindness, possibly a sign of his ego, that he couldn't conceive of someone with a disability ever being able to be such a thorn in his side. He also notes, though, that despite all this, he's not satisfied.
I should not tamper with this. I am well positioned. I should leave him to the misery that awaits him. I must deny myself the exquisite pleasure of a killing stroke.
On the other hand, though, my 3 o'clock got canceled and I'm really bored, so... Karen Page returns to the guy she had sold the secret identity to for more drugs, but she enters right in the middle of the guy being assassinated by one of the Kingpin's goons. She flees, realizing she needs to get to Matt Murdock even as the assassin shoots at her. Matt walks home in the cold, thinking paranoid thoughts about how it couldn't be one single person against him, but maybe everybody's against him, even beginning to think that Foggy is in on it because of him seemingly getting together with his ex. But he realizes how stupid that sounds and just needs some sleep. And his apartment building explodes.
My God, even the landlord was in on it!
However, he inspects the wreckage and discovers his tattered Daredevil costume.
So you know. So that's why. I never would have connected it to you. Nothing about it said gangster. Until this. It was a nice piece of work, Kingpin. You shouldn't have signed it.
Blowing up buildings! The Kingpin's calling card. The next issue, Matt uses his last $10 to stay at a seedy hotel that, frankly, looks more like a closet than a room of any kind. I don't know, maybe hotels like this exist, but do they only have a bed, a radiator, and a nightstand? Like, maybe it's a communal bathroom and that's why it only costs $10? I don't know.
Place smells like rat hair. I'd much rather stay with a friend. Show me one and I'll stay with him. Show me one single person in the world who hasn't betrayed me. You're the only one I can trust, filthy stained mattress.
Yeah, unfortunately, even if he realizes the Kingpin is behind this, his paranoia has gotten the best of him, and he keeps switching between everyone being out to get him, or just the Kingpin trying to destroy him. Hell, it's so bad that he keeps flip-flopping over whether he'll kill the Kingpin, or just beat him within an inch of his life. His mental and physical exhaustion even keep him from leaving the room, which in turn is no respite, since his enhanced senses make him hear stuff through the paper-thin walls. Radios, car alarms, alarms, etc. The owner of the hotel even comes by for money, and Matt's paranoia makes him think it's someone working for the Kingpin.
Checkout was at noon, bum, so give with $8 or you're out on your...
Oh yeah, the guy who's keeping the rat-infested closet hotel where you pee in the corner is definitely running a tight ship here. That $8 is needed to clean the pillowcase by pouring some bleach on it and hanging it out the window for 5 minutes. Kingpin's having Matt followed, and the guy who had been doing the following recounts his actions after leaving the hotel. How he boarded a subway, some goons tried to rob the subway passengers at gunpoint, and Matt only intervened when they specifically pointed a gun at his face, at which point he proceeded to kick the crap out of them. To be fair though, no one wants to be bothered when they're riding public transportation. This is all done while the Kingpin is working out, so a little fan service for the ladies, I guess. Matt holds an entire imaginary conversation with Foggy at a payphone.
Is this the human condition of madness, leader? It is.
Karen Page is unable to get in touch with Matt over the phone either, as she once again flees assassins. Ben Urich, meanwhile, demands that J. Jonah Jameson let him investigate a story about Matt Murdock's whole thing being a frame-up.
Of course! Spider-Man tries to ruin the life of innocent blind lawyer! You've got it!
Matt just finally goes to Fisk's tower to confront him, but of course he's been expecting his arrival and his secretary lets him right in. And apparently the Kingpin's been at this workout session for a while, still in the same purple Speedo and everything. Gotta imagine that Fisk has spent the last couple days in there just in the Speedo, waiting exactly for this moment. It's the ultimate final power move to defeat Daredevil in combat while wearing no pants. Although admittedly this is because he doesn't realize that Murdock is blind. Oh, and this has happened a few times now in the comic, but behold our sound effect when Matt tries to hit the Kingpin with a stick. Fap. Which is probably the other reason that the Kingpin is still in that Speedo, but let's not dwell on that image. To Matt's credit, he gets in a few good hits on Fisk, going for the head, probably the smartest move considering the rest of him is not actually fat but muscle. Ultimately though, Fisk knocks him down and, despite the temptation to kill him here, knows he needs to make it look like an accident, staging him in a stolen cab in the river, bottle of whiskey in his hand, and days turn to weeks as they wait for the body to be discovered. He imagines one last terrible moment of realization, of Murdock thrashing wildly, desperately, hatefully, screaming soundlessly into the poisoned water. The Kingpin shudders at the thought, in pleasure. Ew, what did I just say about not dwelling on that image? Eventually, the cab is found, except there is no corpse. The seatbelt was cut through with a shard of glass and evidence of a struggle. Whoops. The next issue begins with Matt's life flashing before his eyes, somewhat. Of course, with the whole blindness thing, most of what he recalls over the course of several pages is darkness and voices, including a woman who gives him a cross in the hospital after the accident as a kid that robbed him of his sight. He's not quite dead yet, but he is sleeping in an alley next to two other hobos, which is probably still preferable to that hotel room, but he eventually musters the strength to get up and keep moving. It's Christmas time now, and Foggy helps fend off a mugger who is going to steal Gloriana's purse. Urich is continuing his story, with his only lead being Nick Manolis. He's still not talking, but Urich put together the pieces because of his son in the hospital, who's about to undergo surgery due to complications. The issue goes back and forth like that to all the stories. Matt failing to stop two crooks who steal some Santa suits to get money from donating rich people, Nick Manolis' son dying and finally willing to talk to Urich about the deal, and Karen Page getting saved by a mobster who liked her porn movies enough to kill the assassins after her. How frickin' good were these porn movies if gangsters are recognizing her for them months or years later while she's malnourished and drug-addled? As Foggy and Glory finally formalize their relationship, it turns out the nurse working alongside Manolis' boy was an agent of the Kingpin, since she murders Nick and threatens Urich to leave the story alone. Matt ends up back in his old neighborhood and the gym his dad trained at, beating at the punching bag until he collapses and is discovered by a nun. Given the art emphasizing the cross she's wearing and how she recognizes him, it's pretty clear that she's the one who gave him the cross as a kid. The issue ends with the Kingpin once more working out, having finally swapped out his purple Speedo for some tidy whities, it seems. When does the Kingpin have time to run his criminal empire when he apparently spends all his time working out in his underwear? What is it about Murdock?
He was a minor concern, a promising talent to be observed and catalogued and even occasionally flattered, and perhaps one day to be turned to the Kingpin's way. But he is more than this. Now he is much more than this. He always was. And I have shown him that a man without hope is a man without fear.
Well, yeah, but that same lack of fear is what made him walk in your front door armed with only a stick and then end up at the bottom of the river, so... The next issue begins with Matt at a mission run by the nuns, the one who saved him happily proclaiming that he's alive. And yeah, I can't help but feel the symbolism is a bit on the nose with his position on the bed, the crucifix hanging over him and... born again written at the bottom. Still, I won't really begrudge the story that him metaphorically dying and rising again is kind of the entire point. It's not like they're throwing in a Jesus metaphor for Foggy Nelson getting a new girlfriend. Karen is still with the gangster who saved her, while the Kingpin is, oh, for the love of a red Speedo this time! For crying out loud, Wilson! Put on some damn pants already! Anyway, Foggy gets a new job while Yurik is thoroughly frightened off the story, not even wanting to think the Kingpin's name. Probably a good idea. I mean, this is the Marvel Universe we're talking about here. He could have telepaths in his employ. As you can probably tell, I'm kind of summarizing a lot at this point. The problem is, aside from the fact that this is 6 issues we're reviewing here, it's a very densely written story, with a lot of switching between characters and a lot of narration. It's talking about the mindset of the characters, what they're feeling, restating their motivations, showing us a progression of each of their stories, and how they eventually come back together over time. And it'd probably get tedious after a while of me saying, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then a woman does a sex because Frank Miller. Anyway, the point is that the Kingpin, worrying about the fact that Murdoch is still out there, and apparently possessing this much will to live, needs to be dealt with, so he decides to call in the big guns, a character named Nuke. Matt eventually recovers enough to want to leave the mission, but his legs are in particularly bad shape, and the nun who found him, Maggie, calls him an idiot and puts him back to bed. And while I joke about J. Jonah Jameson, he lays into Yurik as he starts to back down off the story because of how important it is.
This is 5 million readers worth of power. It can depose mayors. It can destroy presidents. Our restaurant critic can topple nations, Yurik.
He says it's long overdue for them to take down the Kingpin, but it won't happen if Yurik gets scared now. But he says nothing and gets thrown out of the office.
That's a good boy, Yurik. You stay a good boy. You remember, the Kingpin's watching. You remember, you got 5 more fingers.
The janitor doesn't actually work for the Kingpin. He's just mad that Yurik always puts wet food in his trash can without a liner. Karen made it back to New York with the gangster, who allows her to meet with Foggy, but letting her know quite violently to come back after she's done because she belongs to him now. And she tells him some of what's been going on and how she needs to find Matt or she's dead. Unfortunately, of course, he's been missing for 2 weeks and no one can find him. Matt, however, is in the mission and meeting with Maggie after a fever he had throughout the issue broke. He recognizes her as the one with the cross, but what's more, he asks her point blank if she's his mother. And while she denies it, he can hear her heartbeat and that she's lying. The next issue begins with him, more recovered now, knocking a punching bag off of the chain it was hanging from. Oh great, just when you think his luck's turning around, now he owes that gym money! Near the end of the last issue, Yurik finally found his courage again and has now told everything to the cops, leaving out Daredevil's identity just as the Kingpin is behind the frame-up on Murdoch, and printing the first in a series of stories on the Kingpin. Fisk wants to take the nurse who murdered Nick out of state until the heat dies down, but she's an idiot and decides to go deal with Yurik herself, who now has police protection. She breaks into his house, almost kills his wife, but Matt has been following him ever since the story broke and manages to take her down. Kingpin, meanwhile, commissions a known costume maker to make a Daredevil costume and gets ready to get a criminal sociopath released and put into said costume. No doubt the Kingpin is pulling a megamind here and trying to recreate his own worst enemy. It's the only thing that motivated him enough to put on clothes again. Foggy has taken Karen home with him to help her get away from the gangster, and they spot him watching his apartment and call the cops on the guy. Being such a smart gangster, he immediately opens fire on said cops, and at the same time, Kingpin's plan with the fake Daredevil is put into action, trying to use him to murder Foggy. Of course, the guy they picked is so deranged that he attacks the Kingpin's agent too. It's all a bit chaotic, but the end result is that Matt beats up the fake Daredevil, the gangster gets shot by more of the Kingpin's assassins, Foggy is knocked out, but Karen and Matt are reunited. Urich writes up what follows, including how the assassin's employment with Fisk will keep the Kingpin's attorneys busy for a while. As for the murderer in the Daredevil costume, he was located on the roof without a Daredevil costume, or any other clothes for that matter. Stealing now, Matt? Truly you have fallen from grace. Our next issue starts us off with meeting that Nuke fellow, who is apparently some kind of murderous military dude who paints an American flag on his face. Because when your code name is Nuke, subtlety is about as useful as sweatpants to the Kingpin. So after he blows up some rebel base in Nicaragua, he's brought into New York for the Kingpin. Nuke. Such a simple term. So direct. And now the Kingpin of crime will aim this nuke at the man he is learning to hate. The man he is learning to fear. Murdoch. Wait, he didn't hate Murdoch before? I'd hate to see what he does with the guys he doesn't like. Meanwhile, Matt and Karen are together, and he's helping her go cold turkey from the drugs. He's not even upset about what she did. As part of his whole rebirth from this whole thing, he's kind of shed himself of recriminations and resentments about material possessions or the like. As Nuke makes his way to the USA, we also discover that he's a drug user too, taking alternating red, white, and blue pills. Oh hey, we finally found the backstory for Holy Terror's The Fixer. He's so much a fan of America that he doesn't know that Milwaukee is a city in it. You always hear about supposed fake fans of geek culture, but here's the real thing: fake America fans. Fisk is informed that that nurse who tried to kill Urich is turning state's evidence on the Kingpin in exchange for a more lenient sentence. Now ready to even spill the beans to Urich, so Kingpin arranges for another of his crooked cops to be in on the meeting. And indeed, that meeting does not go well. The crooked cop and the attorney, or warden or whoever who had informed the Kingpin of this, try to assassinate Urich and the woman in the closed cell, but Urich and his police guard manage to overpower them, though only thanks to Urich violently killing one and the police guard getting shot himself. In the meantime, Matt finally shaves, so at least someone's having a good day. Kingpin meets with Nuke, and he manipulates him pretty well through talk of America and all that, even while admitting he's a criminal, just to get him to Murdoch and kill him. I am not a villain, my son. I am a corporation. Well, now you're just giving contradictory messages, dude. Hell's Kitchen is aching muscles and growling stomachs.
We're in the middle of service right now, and I want food. Shut it!
Hell's Kitchen is where I was born. And born again. The burgers sizzle and snap.
Burger requested medium well, stone cold in the middle, and it's fucking rare. Fuck off.
The eggs, they're the best part.
Why is he cooking scrambled egg when he can't even season it?
Anyway, yeah, Matt's working at a diner even as Foggy, Ben, and Glory sit down to eat. Matt knocks off for the day, not wanting to see them just yet. He notices a helicopter in the sky, and we see that the Kingpin has indeed tracked him thanks to a tip from that Santa guy a while ago. Yes, Murdoch will reveal himself when Hell's Kitchen burns.
The ducks burn! You're cooking in a burnt pan, you fucking dick!
Nuke is dropped off, and despite being told to only do a little property damage, he of course starts mowing down people and firing off rockets, because the Kingpin keeps hiring really stupid, over-the-top lunatics to do these things. Matt has to save Karen from a rocket blast, just narrowly, and changes into his costume. I thought I'd have to be a lot more patient than this, Kingpin. I thought I'd have to wait for weeks for you to get sloppy like you did with my house. This is what happens when the Kingpin doesn't get his 14 hours of workout each day. He just loses it. The helicopter pilot wants to bring him back up as the heat starts coming in, but Daredevil arrives to toss his billy club against Nuke's head and get his attention, leading us into the final issue. Hell's Kitchen screams.
Where's the lamb sauce?
Come on, man.
I just need a...
This is the lamb
Where's the lamb
That's the lamb
sauce?
Nuke leaps out of the plane after Daredevil, completely unhinged. Daredevil tries his best to fight him off, but despite hitting nerve clusters, the guy's eyes, any number of spots that should take him down, it doesn't work. The Kingpin's assistant tries to get him to call off Nuke because of the attention this could bring, but Fisk isn't worried, especially since the officials he bribed to bring Nuke in should protect him anyway, lest it be known their connection to all this.
The big fucking sack of piss and wind.
Nuke gets tossed into some power lines and it barely phases him. He's been rambling for the last 2 issues about soldiers in Vietnam. Our boys!
Fuck off you fat useless sack of fucking Yankee doodle shite.
Daredevil is forced to take Nuke's gun and bring down the helicopter, but before he can get a confession out of Nuke concerning the Kingpin's involvement, surprisingly enough, the Avengers arrive. Yeah, Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man take him into custody while helping with the wounded and the property damage. Later, Cap tracks down Matt and wants to know who the hell Nuke is. Matt doesn't know, only that he's no ordinary terrorist. He's superhuman of some kind. Cap wants to figure it out because the guy's wearing a flag on his face. And I guess Cap has just forgotten about all the other douchebags who've killed people while wearing the flag before. Cap confronts the General and the Kingpin's payroll about Nuke, but he says the matter's classified. As such, while Nuke starts going nuts in the Army's custody, since they want to send him away until the heat dies down, but he wants to stay and fight the enemy, Cap goes into the basement of the base they're on and discovers that Nuke was one of the people experimented on to try to recreate the super soldier formula used on him. He engages Nuke while he's on a rampage, knocking him through a wall into another building. While this has been going on, Daredevil has taken the time to rob from the rich to give to the poor, stealing money from some of the Kingpin's con men that would be funneled into some of his legitimate business, and instead plans to give it to the diner owners whose place got destroyed in Nuke's rampage. Said con men conveniently get a call about Nuke's escape from the army base. The army moves in to try to take him back, but Daredevil gets to him first, Cap standing in the way of the soldiers moving in to grab him. Daredevil takes Nuke to the Daily Bugle and drops his body off right on Urich's desk. Great job there, Daredevil, but you just ruined his typewriter. Cap also intercepted some assassins who had intended to take out Nuke and Daredevil, and they spill the beans on the Kingpin's involvement. The wrap-up is only a page. Fisk is brought up on a lot of charges. While none of them really stick, a lot of his underlings have lost confidence in him, and in the eyes of the public, he's a criminal, and even legitimate business contacts want nothing to do with him. It may not have brought him down as far as he had Murdoch, but it's no longer a win for him. Hence why he retreats to the gym in a blue Speedo. You think he has a different color for every day of the week? And so our comic ends with Kingpin thinking that he at least took away Daredevil's law practice from him, but as we see on the last page, Matt doesn't really seem to mind, as he walks down the streets of Hell's Kitchen with a now clean Karen Page. And fortunately, Matt will never have to worry about the Kingpin knowing his secret identity ever again. This comic is good, and cements why exactly Frank Miller was considered such a great writer to begin with. It's not a perfect story, of course, and I'll list off my minor issues with it in a moment, but as it is, it's a tale that pushes the hero to the absolute brink, destroying everything that made him who he is and forces him to rebuild from the basics. Most Christ allegories go for the self-sacrifice angle of Jesus, but this one is more about the death and rebirth part, both for Matt and Karen, who have to find themselves again after all they've been through. As I said earlier in the review, it's a very wordy book, but it all works because we get a true sense of the mindsets of the characters and what they're going through. The Kingpin's sadistic triumphs and reflections, Matt's growing paranoia, Karen's guilt over what she's done, Ben Urich's terror at being confronted by real consequences for what he's writing. It's all strong stuff. Some of Miller's later quirks are present, like weird random emphasis of words and the transformation of Karen Page into a drug-addicted porn star, but Miller isn't relying upon such tactics as much in these early days. It's just a dark story where the characters come out the other end stronger than they began. As for the weaknesses, one of the issues is one of padding. We don't have to keep cutting to the Kingpin in his underwear, reveling in his success, or pontificating in narration about how evil he is. The addition of Nuke and Captain America comes out of left field a bit. I think the idea was that the Kingpin had grown so powerful that the only way they could reasonably put a dent in him was to link him to larger government corruption where he wouldn't have as much much protection, or maybe trying to link corporate and criminal evil to military evil, but if that's the case, it's pretty weak and kind of tacked onto a story that didn't need it. And while the story does end on a positive note, it does feel like it's lacking some resolution, since Matt never reunites with Foggy, nor does he reclaim what's been stolen from him. Sure, given the whole concept of being reborn, it may not matter to him, but what about his finances that have been seized by the IRS, or clearing his good name? Did Urich's story accomplish that? And of course, the Kingpin still knows his secret identity, so why doesn't he just order his regular assassins to shoot him in the head? And while reuniting with his mother is a neat idea, it doesn't actually go anywhere in this other than, oh hey, turns out she's alive and not dead. Cool. Sure, that's something that can be explored in other issues, but they make a big deal out of it here and then never do anything to resolve it. Still, Born Again is a classic for a reason, and if Frank Miller had actually stayed at this level of work, I wouldn't have to have an entire segment of this show devoted to making fun of him being a weird old racist who made Batman call a 12-year-old retarded. Next time, another Patreon-sponsored review of a good story, once again challenging a hero and forcing us to ask the question, what's so funny about truth, justice, and the American way? Show me one single person in the world who hasn't betrayed me.
Everybody betrayed me. I'm fed up with this world.
Hello, my friends. Please be sure to like this video, subscribe, hit the bell, and share it with others. And if you get a chance, maybe check out my Patreon.